Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at some source material that, well, it really gets into some potent ideas about personal privacy, financial freedom, and maybe living a bit more autonomously. Think of it like uncovering some underground knowledge. It's a collection of insights, strategies.
Yeah.
It really challenges how we usually think about individuals versus, big institutions. Our mission, we'll navigate this, pull out the key stuff, the surprising bits, and get you up to speed quickly.
Exactly. And this material, it offers a very specific viewpoint on how people relate to governments, corporations. It looks at ways individuals might try to boost their own freedom. But it's really important to say the source has strong opinions. We're here to explore those ideas as they're presented, okay? Not necessarily endorsing them, just understanding what the text says.
Right. So the goal is just to extract those nuggets, help you grasp these complex ideas without, getting lost in the weeds. Okay, so let's unpack this. Right away, the sources highlight this fundamental tension. What's the core conflict here?
Well, the source suggests a struggle, basically. Governments, bureaucracies, they're seen as getting increasingly intrusive. And it argues most people, maybe the 99%, as the source puts it, are just too busy trying to get by.
Too busy to notice or react?
Kind of. Too preoccupied with daily life, leaving them maybe more open to this intrusion.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
The source says the big difference between these battlers and the 1% isn't just money, but knowledge and time. What kind of knowledge are we talking about?
It's practical stuff, according to the source, like understanding how systems really work, how you might make more money, maybe pay less tax legally, finding more freedom, knowing the laws, the loopholes, protecting your privacy, basically how to operate without constant government interference, understanding individual sovereignty, too.
So it's that old Francis Bacon idea, knowledge is power.
Exactly. The source really leans into that, suggesting it's especially true now.
And the material doesn't pull any punches making its case, does it? There's some strong quotes in there.
Definitely. Quotes hinting at deep government interference, views similar to Ayn Rand on, collectivism potentially crushing individual rights.
And just to reiterate for everyone listening, these are the viewpoints in the source material we're looking at.
Precisely. An argument develops. The source suggests governments might not actually want everyone to be super successful or independent.
Why not?
Because, the thinking goes, if people are highly successful and self-reliant, they might feel they need less government help, less interference. So the view presented is that maybe some laws that limit liberty are really about maximizing state power, getting more tax revenue. The source points to things like politician rewards or big payouts as examples of where the focus lies.
So for you listening, why does the source think you should care about all this perceived intrusion?
Well, the source paints a picture where governments sometimes seem disconnected from how laws affect ordinary people, and that maybe they see hard work mainly as just, a source of taxes. But the core message isn't doom and gloom. It suggests individuals aren't helpless, that with the right knowledge, the right strategies, you can potentially navigate around this stranglehold, as it calls it.
Okay, that leads us right into a really big theme in the source. Privacy. Feeling watched.
Yeah, a huge focus. The position taken is clear. Privacy is a basic right, and it's under attack. The source contrasts the idea of the state being supreme versus the citizen being sovereign, arguing privacy is key to being sovereign. It gives examples of perceived erosion, like criticizing the lack of strong privacy laws in places like Australia, or relying on international law for basic rights protection there instead of, say, a domestic Bill of Rights.
And it gets into surveillance systems that sound, well, almost like something out of a spy movie.
It does. It talks about Echelon, described in the source as this global network run by the US NSA and partners UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK-US. Its purpose, according to the material, huge. Intercepting civilian emails, faxes, phone calls, using computer scanning for keywords. A dictionary system.
Wow, keywords.
Yeah. And it mentions specific Australian sites allegedly involved. The concern raised is that even if it's mainly for terrorism or economic intelligence, there are reports it's monitored non-criminal groups too, like Amnesty International.
But it's not just the high-tech spy stuff, right? The source talks about more everyday ways privacy gets compromised.
Oh, absolutely. It covers a lot physical stuff too, like phone hooking, bugs using power lines, even lasers listening through windows by picking up vibrations. That's what the source describes. And it also suggests there are countermeasures for these sorts of things. But beyond bugs, it stresses protecting your data trail, how easily data can be recovered from computers, even if you delete it. Think about info from warranty cards, online forms. Mobile phones are flagged too, tracking movement via cell towers. The source warns about itemized bills.
So turn off your phone if you're concerned.
That's one suggestion. Or using public phones with phone cards and even destroying the used cards. It mentions the McVeigh case as an example there.
Wow.
Bank privacy gets discussed too. Methods authorities might use to read letters, solvents, steam, and countermeasures like patterned envelopes or foil lining.
And it seems banks and governments are watching finances very closely as well.
Yes, that's a major point. Laws requiring banks report big cash transactions, often $10K plus, and even smaller suspicious ones. The source argues this puts ordinary people under scrutiny just for handling their own cash from legitimate sources. You get that feeling of, hey, it's my money. Why all the questions?
So what's the proposed alternative?
Offshore banking is suggested as one strategy. Places like Jersey are mentioned. Though the source does acknowledge things tightened up after 9/11, know your customer rules reporting suspicious transactions. It's more scrutinized now, even offshore. But the suggestion is that confidentiality can still be high unless there's clear criminal activity involved. Tax offenses were often excluded from mandatory reporting in some places, according to the source.
And it mentions the idea of a cashless society.
Briefly, yeah, linking it to concerns about government control, making it easier to collect taxes. It mentions OECD reports possibly suggesting this direction.
Okay, so if privacy feels threatened, what about freedom more broadly? Autonomy. The source suggests other paths.
Right. One big idea is the perpetual traveler, or PT.
Perpetual traveler, what's that?
As the source describes it, it's someone who arranges their life travel, finances, so they don't stay long enough in one high-tax or highly regulated place to become a tax resident. It brings up W.G. Hill's 5 flags theory as a kind of framework for this.
5.
Yeah. The idea is to plant different flags, metaphorically speaking, in different countries. Your passport citizenship in one place, your business income maybe sourced elsewhere, your official residence somewhere else again, then where you manage your assets, and finally your playgrounds where you spend your leisure time. Diversifying to avoid being tied down.
That's quite a concept. Another one mentioned is the world passport. Sounds fascinating.
It does. The source explains it's issued by the World Service Authority. The idea behind it is promoting freedom of travel as a human right, sort of challenging nation-state control over movement. Looks like a passport, multiple languages. The source claims over 140 countries have sometimes visaed it, kind of a de facto acceptance sometimes, though it's not universally recognized.
So it's not a replacement for a national passport?
No, the source clarifies that. You still need your citizenship, still pay taxes where due, but it's presented as maybe a useful ID or an alternative travel document in some situations.
And the source also argues for getting a second citizenship, a second passport.
Yes, it makes a case for it. For travel freedom, having a backup, maybe avoiding attention in certain countries, depending on which passport you use. It even mentions the possibility of having a different legal name on the second one for privacy. But, and this is crucial, it warns never carry both if the names are different.
Good tip. Does it recommend certain passports?
It mentions Irish being good for visa-free Europe, Australian also highly regarded, and suggests avoiding passports from certain, perhaps more restrictive, nations.
Okay, shifting gears slightly to finance again. Beyond offshore banks, how else does the source suggest managing money more privately?
It lists various methods that aim to reduce the paper trail. Things like bank drafts under certain limits, say 5K, wire transfers, especially offshore to offshore, also check recycling, bearer bonds, secured credit cards where you put down a deposit first, money market accounts, even precious metals certificates like the Perth Mint program it describes. You own the metals stored securely, get a certificate, but it's not cash, so maybe less reporting.
Any other methods?
Older ones like international money orders, traveler's checks, and less conventional ideas like buying refundable first-class airline tickets, essentially storing value you can cash in later, using Western Union with a test question. And a key piece of advice: be careful using credit cards for sensitive things. Guns, travel bookings, hotels, even travel guides. They leave a clear trail.
Does it touch on investing?
Yeah, briefly. It advocates a sort of common sense approach, focus on companies with real earnings growth, avoid scams and hot tips. It also mentions offshore investment funds, citing platinum funds as an example with high reported returns back then, and offshore insurance trusts as potential tools for managing assets and maybe lowering tax, according to the source.
And it talks about tax havens in more detail.
It does. Defines different types. No tax, low tax, tax on foreign income only. Discusses choosing one based on stability, political, economic, legal system. Likes British common law jurisdictions, places with strong privacy laws. The source argues they're used legally by big corporations and serious investors all the time, not just for crime, holds huge amounts of wealth. But it also acknowledges the pressure, like tax harmonization efforts from bigger countries. Mentions Germany's view on the Channel Islands as an example.
The source also highlights specific places, special destinations. What makes them special?
According to the source, these are places that might appeal if you want to escape bureaucracy, pollution, high costs. Maybe you want a slower life, more privacy, more freedom. It stresses you need to look at culture, healthcare, democracy levels, residency rules, the practical stuff.
Can you give us a couple of examples just to get a feel for the variety?
Sure. It mentions Campione d'Italia, that Italian enclave inside Switzerland, described as having this kind of de facto tax-free status because of its casino. Uses Swiss francs. Expensive property, though. Then there's Belize. Low cost, simple life, easy residency, apparently. Ambergris Caye, mentioned as popular with expats. Uruguay is another. Low cost, no income or inheritance tax reported, cheap property, and potentially a path to an EU passport via Spain eventually.
Interesting. Hungary, too.
Yes, mentioned for really low property prices, though linked to a cash market. Potential upside with EU entry was noted. So yeah, different places, different benefits, tax, costs, lifestyle. Some, like Uruguay or Brazil via Portugal, potentially offered routes to other citizenships, as described in the source.
Let's loop back to technology. The source sees it as a double-edged sword, right? Used by institutions, but also potentially by individuals.
Exactly. The view is that technology is essential for mass surveillance by institutions that lack the manpower. But the internet, described as a loose cannon, has also empowered people. Information sharing, free speech, challenging control. And it talks about tech individuals can use for privacy. Things like digital cash or alternative currencies were emerging then, e-gold, digicash mentioned as examples, based on metal backing or anonymity features. Also suggests lower tech secure comms, handwritten faxes from public machines, coded messages using a one-time pad, public phone calls with cards.
What about online?
Using internet cafes for anonymity, secure webmail services anonymizer, Hushmail, were examples given designed to hide your IP address, protect against monitoring, even simple tricks like changing email font to wingdings. But it always comes back to vigilance. Reiterates the surveillance threat Echelon, FBI's carnivore program scanning emails. Even if messages are encrypted, traffic analysis can show who's talking to whom.
So bringing this all together, the source ends with that striking question. Desire for privacy and crime. What's the final takeaway presented?
The core argument is basically, wanting privacy isn't sinister. It's not about hiding crime. It's about wanting to be left alone, free from constant watching, questioning, data selling. It compares that feeling of being monitored to, someone creepy watching you, uncomfortable, intrusive. And it circles back to perceived government motivations, control, tracking people, intimidation, managing information. It points to things the source calls jailable crimes against the state, like not voting or not filling out a census, as examples of this drive for control.
And a big concern about censorship comes through at the end, too.
Yes, huge concern, especially online. The worry expressed is that laws supposedly for banning offensive stuff could easily be twisted to shut down political criticism. Or information governments just don't like the offshore options discussed in the source itself. There's a stark warning in there, quoting someone saying censorship can become book burning. So the final message is really a call for awareness, for vigilance, pushing politicians for stronger privacy laws, maybe a Bill of Rights. The fear expressed is that people could become brainwashed or just accept a less free life. It quotes the ACLU saying fear of monitoring is a hallmark of totalitarian societies.
Wow. That was quite a journey through some really challenging, thought-provoking material. Thanks for bringing this source to us for the deep dive. We've covered so much ground: global surveillance, financial strategies, alternative ways of living, and this fundamental question about the right to privacy.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with, stemming from these themes. In this age of incredible technology for tracking and institutions pushing for, more transparency and control, does pursuing privacy and financial autonomy, like the source outlines, represent a vital reclaiming of basic rights? Or is it maybe just trying to sidestep the necessary structures of our interconnected, regulated world? That's the tension the source leaves us grappling with.
A powerful question indeed raised by this material. Definitely something to think about based on everything we've unpacked today. We hope you continue exploring these ideas.